The Democrat Party is G.I.A.G. And all of them are in direct opposition against the prophecy to stop the glory from coming. But they have, now listen close to what I'm going to say, but they have pushed not just the nation, but the world into the third stage of subversion, the crisis mode. You know, I'm starting to hear this more and more now. People are talking about the art of war. I've heard it, and I really didn't hear anybody talking about it till I heard about it way back, and now it seems like people are talking about it. I was listening to an old recording of JFK talking to one of the generals. I think it was Eisenhower, and he was talking to him. And you could sit there and listen to them talk on this old recording. And he was talking about how the Soviets, if they continued in their subversion tactics, he understood that. And so that might be why he's not here. But I'm going to tell you something. In the third stage, subversion is the art of war. One day I'm going to learn how to say this guy's name right. It's either Sun Se or Sun Tzu or something. I asked somebody in Idaho in a crowd the other night. I said, the art of war, who wrote the art of war? And they gave me 3 different names. I said, see, nobody really knows how to pronounce that. And so I just stuck with my own. But he was an advisor in about 3,500 years ago to the Chinese dynasty. And he came up with a plan to win a nation, to take a nation without ever shedding blood. And he said the best way to win a war is to never have to fight the war. And he said it's done in 4 stages. One is demoralization, is when you take people into that nation and you want them to be your nation, so you come in with your professors, your teachers, your people, and you come in and you start to brainwash generations with your teaching. And he said you have to ease it in there. See, it has to be done without any resistance at all. Everybody, you need to really listen to this because I'm not going to take a long time with it, but I want you to hear it. So he says the first stage takes 15 to 20 years because you have to have at least 3 educated generations so that the third one comes out completely demoralized of what they believed in freedom. Now they only believe what you believe in your nation. And then after that, you bring them out and you start putting those graduates into control of media, into government, into high-ranking positions. And they say once a generation is demoralized, you could show them the truth. You could hand them a piece of paper written in black and white to tell them every truth, every fact, and they still wouldn't believe it. They said you could show it to them. And I remember one man who defected from the Soviet Union who was an expert in ideological warfare. He said you could take them to a Soviet concentration camp in those days, to a Soviet concentration camp, show them what you're saying is true, and they still can't see it because they're brainwashed, completely demoralized. That's why you look at liberal media, liberal news, all these people, and they just look at you with their head tilted and this nowhere look on their face, this far-off look, like they don't even understand, how to eat peanut butter. They just look off. And you can tell them that killing 345,000 unborn a year is not right, and they just look at you with their eyes glazed over. And the man from the Soviet Union that defected here in 1970, he said this, in the 70s, he said, by that time, he said, there's nothing you can do to tell them any different. They're lost. And so then you put those kind of people in control, carrying the subversion nation, the ones who's subverting, carrying their ideologies into this nation. And now you've unleashed a whole generation of people that are running the government that think like that. Yeah. Yeah, and then when that gets to that place and they can't see anything else, then they bring up radicals. And that takes about 5 years, they said. So that brings up the radicals. They'll start using groups like Black Lives Matter. They'll start using groups like Antifa. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist group out of their own mouth. Their own website says they're Marxist. And so they start using the groups like that. Back in the 70s and 80s, they were using the homosexual movement. They were using women's lib. They were using anything. Then you had people like Saul Alinsky writing rules for radicals in his book. And if you'll notice, that's who Barack Obama studied under. Hillary Clinton met him. He was a hero to all these people. And Saul Alinsky dedicated his book to Lucifer. It's in his book. Just look at it. It's in his book. He dedicates it to the greatest radical of all, Lucifer. Man, he didn't really mean it. Then he should have dedicated it to Daffy Duck or something. But he dedicated it to Lucifer himself, who rebelled against heaven. I don't tell you what they're about. Then that takes about 5 years. And how do you know when you've been in, and that's called the destabilization mode of subversion. The demoralized generation is empowering the destabilization of the nation. How do you know when that's happened? They start rioting. Then policemen become the enemy. All authority becomes their enemy. And they do all these things. And they'll use any group that has a movement. Any group that has a movement. Man, we have so many groups now. We got groups that fight to let men go in the bathroom with your little girls because they identify as some kind of little girl, I guess. And so the government trying to uphold that. Donald Trump said that's not right. And they said, oh my God, he is against freedom. No, he's against child molestation. That might work a lot of places, but I'm going to tell you something, Hoss, that won't work in the South. I know some sixth graders around here drag you out by your ear, probably. I mean, these guys down here, I may be exaggerating a little, but I went to school with sixth graders, was this tall, man. I'm going to tell you something, you don't do that down here. Some old boy drive up in a jacked up four-wheel drive truck and he'll show you real quick what bathroom to go into. But this is part of the destabilization of the nation. You know what? The man who defected, who taught us what the Soviets was trying to do, and Kennedy obviously knew it. Because he talked about an evil, a wickedness. And it was amazing because he was a Democrat. He talked about what he was going to do, and he comes up dead. He's going to do to stop it and to stop things. But he used the word subversion. He dealt with the Soviets. He dealt with all of this stuff. Well, the man who defected, who revealed all this to us, said this. He said, what do they do with all those groups when they finally subvert the nation and they're in control? He said, what do they do with all of them? He said, they shoot them. He said, they just shoot them. Because they don't need anybody destabilizing anything now. So the third stage, that's first is 15, 20 years. Second's 5 years, 5 to 6 years. The third stage is called crisis mode. Crisis is when you've pushed the nation up to the edge and you've got such a crisis going on that it's about to get shoved over the edge. And this is what he said. He said, once a nation gets to crisis mode, there's no coming back. He said, if it ever makes it into crisis mode, you can't get it back. He said, there's only two things that will bring it back from a crisis mode. And that is a civil war or a foreign invasion. And, you know, that's why we went into Grenada, because Grenada had been subverted and it was in the crisis mode. We had to go in there as a nation and stop it. We were the foreign government that invaded or they would have never came back. And so that's happened, in different nations so many times. And then the fourth stage is normalization. And crisis only takes about 6 months after the nation's destabilized. So then the final stage comes in, and it's an indefinite period of time. It's called normalization. When Comrade Brezhnev took over Czechoslovakia and so forth, he said, brotherly Czechoslovakia has now been normalized when Soviet tanks rolled down their streets. And so at that point, they get rid of all the radicals, every movement, women's lib, homosexual movement, Black Lives Matter, Antifa. It don't matter what they were. They just get rid of them because they don't need them in the normalization stage because they could hurt them. Just think about all this. And so you start looking at it, and you start looking through the Scripture, and you find out Satan uses these tactics. He uses these tactics, and he uses spirits called principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places to assist in these tactics. Now, at this moment in time, it's not just the U.S. that's in the third stage trying to push it into the third stage. Because this is something to bring about world domination and world control. And the 4 stages of the enemy, the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, which works with demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization, which he uses, principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places, uses all of this together. These are the spirits in the book of Revelation that overthrow nations. Now it's not just the U.S. They are pushing for world domination, for the Antichrist, the Bible speaks of, for one day to come. And they're going to push it toward this agenda, and that's what these spirits are doing, to bring about, I will be like the Most High.